Good morning, one and all. Welcome to another Sunday adult Sunday school together on this third Sunday in September 2024. We are in the book of Exodus, chapter 14. Going through the Bible timeline here, this is where we've arrived, the year 1446 BC. And right off the bat, a correction from last week. I said the flood was in 2893 BC. I actually think it's 2953 BC. So my apologies. I know I was keeping y'all up. So 1446 BC. So let me get the screen share going here. There we are. So we're getting timeline info around the Bible from the other nations through Egyptologist David Roll and his new chronology, correcting the mainstream Orthodox chronology of the world histories. And he's an agnostic who recognizes the Bible is true in its history, because when he does his corrections independent of the Bible, all of a sudden world history lines up with the Bible. That never had to change. Go figure. So for an agnostic to recognize that, that's pretty cool. So going with his timelines for outside the Bible, and we are going with Dr. Glenn Fritz. And both of these gentlemen have been very kind in correspondence with me and supporting our work here and the things we're talking about. So let's see. Whoops, too far. Right there it is. Dr. Glenn Fritz. We are following his route for the Exodus journey. And so 1446 BC here puts us in Middle Bronze Age, 2A going into B. Over in China, they're being led by Wai Ren as the emperor of the Shang dynasty, their second dynasty after the Xia dynasty. In Egypt, the pharaoh of the Exodus, Pharaoh Dudamos II of their 13th dynasty during their second intermediate period. Their high point with the Old Kingdom with the pyramids, that was a couple centuries before Abraham. Then they had a dip called the first intermediate period, bringing them up to the Middle Kingdom with Joseph's Pharaoh Amenemhat III, who had the dreams. So that was another high point for them. Now they're in another dip after that, a low point called the second intermediate period. That will be followed by the next big high point, the New Kingdom. That will have King Tut, that will have Ramses the Great, and all of them. That's a few centuries down the line. And so Pharaoh Dudamos II of the 13th dynasty in the second intermediate period is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Over in the Bible lands, Babylon is being ruled by King Amidatana, who's the great-grandson of Hammurabi, famous for his law code. And in the line of Christ, we have, through the tribe of Judah, Aminadab, I put about 98 years old right now, his son Nahshon, about 39. He's the 28th generation of Adam. He's a grandpa to Boaz, and so he's the one who'll be leading the tribe of Judah out of here. So all of that set up, I've got something fun for us here. In fact, stay in place. This one? Oh, thank you. So as we are going through the Exodus, it turns out that Dr. Glenn Fritz had to get together with his pastor at their church over in Vero Beach, Florida, and they did a presentation on the very things we're talking about. So I'm going to share just a little bit from this. That's still out. And notice they did this on September 5th, 10 days ago. Then this was posted on Tuesday, 5 days ago. So I appreciate his consideration in doing this right as we're going through it. That was very nice of him. So let's see. So the point I want to get up to is 21. Let's see. I want to be at, yeah. Because we're going to take over from Etham. Put this right here.
No matter
Big
who
commercials. I'm too cheap to pay for
particular
ad-free. My
care
apologies.
for you. specific term.
Okay, so let me escape out of this real quick. Double check my time spot. My apologies. I should have had all this laid out ahead of time. Here we go. Oh, wait, it's right there. Different videos. 27:32 is what we want. Okay. 27:32. That's good enough for government work. Okay, so check this out. So there's Etham on their journey here. And Dr. Glenn Fritz, he, in his efforts to research this, he almost accidentally, because of his studies, ended up getting a PhD in environmental geography. So yeah, kind of knows this stuff here.
From Edom on the coastal plain above the sea, south, and then entering Pehahilot, the mouth of the caverns, and then the Wadi Watur, the serpentine zigzag creek bed with high mountains on each side. And there's one exit from that wadi, and it's at this beachhead called Nueva on the sea. And so the total route that we looked at from Ramses to that seaside location is 272 miles. I estimate it took them about 18 days, traveling about 15.5 miles a day. And the thing we have to remember about their travel is that they left Egypt in haste. And secondly, they were able to travel day and night because God gave them a pillar of cloud for shade in the daytime and a pillar of fire at night to get light. And travel in the desert is best at night anyway. So if you had the light and you have the cool of the day at night, that's an advantage for their travel. And this is the Nueva beachhead. The Bible says the Egyptians pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea. And the only way the Egyptians could have gotten there is the same way the Hebrews got there, through the Wadi Watur. This is the opening of the wadi onto the beachhead. And this is a view of that beachhead looking southward.
Right. So if your findings are correct, you can imagine coming out from that wide and yet, relatively speaking, for the number of people, narrow passageway through the wadi, and then suddenly coming out to this massive open space along the beach where they come and camp.
Yeah, it's at least 10 square miles, so it's a lot of space and it's pretty flat. This is looking south from the beachhead.
This is actually Moses's camp.
Yes, that's right.
So,
And what's really interesting is the first century Jewish historian Josephus wrote, the Egyptians drove the Hebrews into a narrow place. They seized the passages by which they might flee, shutting them up between inaccessible precipices and the sea, for on each side an impassable ridge of mountains terminated at the sea. That's a pretty amazing historical statement from Josephus. So we can look at the Nueva beachhead and we see the singular entrance from the Wadi Watur and the steep mountains that guard that entrance. And there's no way out of that wadi except to come out onto the beach. And then as we look to the north, we see that the mountains drop into the sea. There's no passage along the coast to the north. And the same thing happens on the south side. The mountains drop into the sea. And so if this is the place, the Hebrews are boxed in by the sea, the Egyptian army, and the mountains. And so they were afraid, and they said to Moses, because there are no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you brought us out of Egypt? Now, the interesting thing about the idea of wilderness is when God told Moses to turn at Edom, he mentioned to Moses that Pharaoh's going to think you're lost in the wilderness, that you're confused, that you're going to be an easy prey because you're stuck. And that's how they felt. They felt like they were stuck. The angel of God moved behind the camp of Israel, and the pillar of cloud stood between the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. It was darkness to one and light to the other, so that neither came near each other all that night. So you've got this army backed up in the wadi, and the Israelites on the beachhead, and you've got this cloud that's a curtain between them. And again, this is a huge beachhead, at least 10 square
And
miles.
the graphic is brilliant.
So just pausing right there, let's see what the scriptures say about what we just saw. Exodus 14. Let's pick up in verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were coming after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone, so we may serve the Egyptians'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will perform for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again, ever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." 15, then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff, reach out with your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. And as for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they will go in after them. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and through his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. And there was the cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Therefore, the one did not approach the other all night. I love this. I love this imagery, as I mentioned last week, and picking up where we left off here, of God coming to their back and having their back and being their rear guard here. So I thought that was pretty spiffy. So any questions, reactions on this video clip or what we've looked at so far? Yeah, Brother Peter. Yeah, we're told in verse 14, verse 19 of chapter 14, the angel of God. So is the angel himself, the angel of God who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and moved and stood behind them. So that's what we've got. We've got the presence of God through the angel and the cloud as a barrier between Egypt's armies and the people of the Lord. Keep in mind, we're talking about 2.5 million people, men, women, children, old and young, and flocks and herds. And we're talking about Pharaoh Dudamos II directly in his own chariot, plus 600 other charioteers and all these others in this army coming after them. So this is a big deal. Brother Clay, you're thinking.
The last sentence in verse 1.
Yeah.
Thus the one did not come near the other all night. And what is he talking
Basically, because of that barrier there,
the Egyptians and
the Egyptians, the Egyptians and the Israelites did not come near each other because of that barrier, because of the barrier, the angel of the Lord and the cloud being a protective barrier between them two, all night long. So just a quick recap of how we got here, looking at the journey that's been laid out. Let's go to. So keep in mind, as he mentions, 2.5 million people traveling. They're not single file. They're not all in a line left to right, straight across. They're in a mass. And so he's estimating that this mass is strung out about 10 to 15 miles. So the leader of the pack is 10 to 15 miles ahead of the rear of the pack. This is a big group of people moving across here. So one of the things we see, since we're told by God that this happened, we know it had to happen logistically and realistically in a way that he provided and made available. And we see that as we map this out. So very quick recap. Here's Joseph's palace that we've looked at and the area of Goshen, Avaris, where they were. So setting out to Succoth on the day after the 10th plague, on the 15th of their month of Nisan. They set out, go 23 miles on that first day journey. So there's this hop over to Succoth. Then they make this turn going across the Sinai Peninsula. By day 4, they arrive up here at El Tassa. So that's a total of 54 miles. And by day 4, Pharaoh has recovered enough to mount his army and chariots and head out. Keep in mind, the Israelites are traveling about 15.5 miles a day. where Pharaoh and his chariots were able to go 20 miles a day. So even though they were 4 days behind, they're able to catch up with him in the end here. So they reached El Tasa, about 54 miles, with the Pharaoh now in pursuit. 2 days later, they make it up to the Katmia Pass on day 6. So they've gone a total of 73 miles. Next day, they make it up to their Bir Gifgafa, which is a total of 89 miles. From Bir Gifgafka over to Bir El Thimada, that's day 9, so another 2 days there. That's another, brings up to 115 miles over to here. From Bir Gifgafka, Bir El Thimada over to the Wadi El Arish Junction here. That's a total of 138 miles from their starting point. That's day 10 that they arrive here. That spot right there is the halfway point of their journey, 10 days in, 138 miles. So they take another 2 days to reach the Wadi Machete mouth up there. So that's day 12, total of 177 miles. From the mouth of the Wadi Machete, they make it over to Etam in 2 more days. So Etam is on day 14, and that's 205 miles to Etam. So going up from their starting place, they reach an elevation of Etam at 2,290 feet. Etam actually means land sloping to the sea. That's what the name means, and that certainly fits. So then they are going to be coming down from Etam through the Wadi Watir, 4 days, 67 miles. The Wadi Watir, Wadi Watir, it actually means the road that follows the mountain, which that makes sense too. So making the turn here at Etam, there's Pi Hahiroth, which means the mouth of the caves or the mouth of the canyons, which fits. And the Bible says that Pi Hahiroth is facing Baal Zephon. Well, Baal Zephon is this mountain directly to the north. Very huge landmark. Zephon means north, and a very prominent mountain of worship for the false gods, just like Mount Olympus for the Greek gods. So yeah, the mouth of the cave. Here's a picture from the space shuttle. So here's Etam, Pi Hahiroth. The mouth of the caves is facing Baal Zephon, the landmark that they're familiar with. And they'll be coming on down through there. So that makes sense. So from Pi Hahiroth, the mouth of the caves, to make it on down here to the Ein Vertaga Spring, El Vertaga, deer, people, and camels. That's how big the mountains are. There's Dr. Glenn Fritz right there playing Waldo, can you find me? And so there you go. Migdol means tower, and that's the towering mountains here. And we're told that Pi Hahiroth has the Mount Migdol on one side and the sea on the other. And sure enough, it does. So that all fits. Then from the Vertaga Springs, they come down through these canyons here, come out to this beachhead that we were just looking at. So they've arrived here. Those are the different spots we looked at the other week. Getting all the photos from there. Which brings us to, this is what's now in front of them. All this water and this path. So, mentioned the word suf in Hebrew in the devotional with Jonah there, how it doesn't mean seaweed. Suf has nothing to do with botanical. Suf just means ending. As we've talked in class here, Red Sea is nowhere in the Hebrew Bible. The phrase is Yam Suf. Yam means sea, Suf means ending or boundary. What happened was this problem arose over 2,000 years ago when the Hebrew Bible was very first translated into another language. It was translated into Greek, what we call the Septuagint. Happened in the 200s BC by the Jews in Alexandria over there in Egypt. Well, what they did when they came across Yam Suf in the Hebrew, they thought, well, we know it's not the Mediterranean Sea, so they must be talking about this other sea, the Red Sea. So they did not translate the Hebrew words Yam Suf. They just replaced it by slapping the name Red Sea on it, which was a mistake. The words do not mean Red Sea. And so the Gulf, and so that's what we've been stuck with ever since. And that's been the misconception here. So the Greeks did not know about the Gulf of Aqaba over here. So you got the Sinai Peninsula, the Gulf of Suez on one side, the Gulf of Aqaba on the other. Taking all the Bible clues, the Gulf of Aqaba fits all the Bible requirements for the Yam Sute, for the Exodus crossing here. But the Gulf of Aqaba was not known by most people. And so, in fact, it wasn't really discovered and mapped out until about 200 years ago, in the 19th century, the 1800s. But a lot of people don't like this idea of the Gulf of Aqaba because that invalidates all of their theories, saying, oh, it must be some shallow place, must be close to Egypt, and not that big a miracle, not that big a deal. Well, not according to the Bible. All the Bible information tells us this is the spot. It's the boundary sea. It was one of the boundaries of the promised land that Abraham was told about. And so everything in the Bible points to this place, and there's nothing that tells us it's anywhere else. There are no Bible statements about this place that are invalidated by this. There's nothing here that contradicts the Bible, where all the other places, there are Bible verses that would disagree with them. And so this also means that Mount Sinai can't be in the Sinai Peninsula. It has to be on the other side of the sea crossing. So it has to be over in Arabia, which makes sense. As we've seen, Paul said that it's corresponding to Jerusalem, Jerusalem above. Well, that's an actual term in cartography with map making that if you look on the lines, Jerusalem falls directly above Mount Sinai. And so it all fits. And Paul had been in Arabia, so he knew Arabia as well. So this messes with some people's comfort zones from what their traditions are, what they're familiar with, but we want to go with the Bible and not tradition. So this Gulf of Aqaba here, let's take a look at this. This is less than 60 seconds here, but well worth it. So bathymetry is the study, if you hear bath, think underwater. So this is the study of the measurements and metrics of the underwater topography. So here's a 50-second look at the crossing site that we're considering here. Yep, and the slopes. Because keep in mind, since this happened, it had to happen in a manner that worked, both with what we're given practically and realistically, and with the supernatural workings of God that we're told he clearly did. Yeah.
Yeah, this is today's picture, right?
Yeah, this has not changed over the thousands of years. Now, the climatology has changed. We're a little drier than we were back then, but the landscape has not changed.
I think that water cuts through ground beneath.
Yeah, erosion and things like that, absolutely. And that's where folks say, well, the Grand Canyon is evidence of an old Earth because of all that work. And so actually, no, because as we see with Mount St. Helens, it's not a little bit of event over a long period of time. No, it's a big event over a short period of time. And the recovery of Noah's flood and the recession from water receding from that was a very big deal. And so we see these things can happen massively in a short amount of time. To your point about the Gulf of Aqaba, there's been no major cataclysmic event there in the last few thousand years. It's been consistent. So what we're seeing is pretty much what they had to work with, which is great for us to examine and imagine what it would have been like for them. So this Gulf of Aqaba, 110 miles in length. The average width is 9.5 miles. The extreme depths, 0.62 miles, almost 2/3 of a mile to the bottom of this thing. And this is caused, back to the things we're talking about, from extensive faulting. You've got the Earth's crust, you've got the Syria and African rift. They kind of rub against each other. And that rift stretches northward, over from East Africa all the way up into Turkey. So because of this geological rifting that's happened thousands of years in the past, this Gulf of Aqaba, you've got what we're seeing with these steep mountain coastlines with their elevations going so drastically into the sea that they don't have roads. There's no room for roads. It goes right from mountain to the sea there along that shoreline. So the fancy thing we're seeing here in what created this is tectonic plates. Those are the large movable pieces of the Earth's what's called the lithosphere. That lithosphere, that's the Earth's crust and the uppermost mantle. That lithosphere is between 34 and 124 miles deep. So these big things were moving against each other as things were settling after the flood, when the ocean depths were ripped open and all those things happened. So we've got tectonic plates, we've got this lithosphere. And so plate tectonics is just studying the large scale movements of these tectonic plates in this lithosphere. So that's what gave us what we see here. So again, summing up this journey, the distance from where they left in Goshen to this beachhead, 272 miles at 15.5 miles a day. The Hebrews could have reached here about 18 days. Egyptian army at about 20 miles a day could have reached them in 14 days. So based on these rates, Pharaoh would have had up to 4 days after the Hebrews left to rally his troops and get heading on out there. Everyone good so far? Makes sense? So 2.5 million people and their herds through the Sinai Peninsula, that would leave a mark temporarily. That would leave kind of a wide swath, a compacted trail, and that would help the Egyptians as they're following them. It's kind of funny because Josephus records that the Egyptians made haste in their pursuit, asked if everyone they met which way they were gone, which if you consider the trail that they would have been blazed, which would not have lasted forever, wouldn't be there for us to see today. So need for directions might have been unnecessary. They could have kind of seen where they plowed through. So we've got, as mentioned, a Migdal on the side of them there. Hello, hello. Yeah. So there's the mountains behind them. So Migdal referring to tower, sure enough, their sea encampment on the sea faces Migdal. It faces those towering mountains. So that fits the Bible. Moses was using big landmarks, not little small local things. So big things for them to go by. And so again, all of this shows that we're far away from Egypt now. In fact, we've gone 272 miles. Numbers 33:8, just one verse. They journeyed from Hahiroth and passed through the midst of the sea to the wilderness, and they went 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham and camped at Marah, going on from there once they get to the other side. But the first half says they journeyed from Hahiroth and passed through the midst of the sea to the wilderness. It actually, some of our Bibles might add the pi here. It's actually not there in the Hebrew. Pi is mouth, like mouth of the caves, but that mouth isn't there. So they journeyed not from the mouth anymore. They journeyed from the opposite side where they came out of the caverns and crossed the sea. So the point there is, this is where some people, when trying to figure this out, get it wrong. It's not that their camp by the sea was right by the mouth of the caves, by Pi-Hahiroth. No, it was at the opposite end where they came out through the mouth. And so the Hebrew there, lifni, just means they're on the face of it. It doesn't mean you have to be right next to it. You could be looking at it. So as the Bible lays out, Pi-Hahiroth, the mouth of the caves, goes straight through the wadi to the encampment at the sea. So the encampment at the sea faced Hahiroth, going back through, up backwards to the mouth. So that seaside encampment does not need to be near Pi-Hahiroth, or it doesn't need to be near Baal-Zephon. Baal-Zephon was the landmark to the north. So in 14 verse 9, they mention knowing about the Egyptians behind them. And the Egyptians come behind them. So it's likely the Hebrews had scouts going ahead and behind them in their rear guard. So that's how they would know about the Egyptians behind them and how many there are. Josephus talks about that too. Yeah.
Did you say earlier that the line of people is about 2 miles long?
From the front of the line to the back. Yeah.
And no walkie-talkie.
Nope.
So, and they only traveled 15
and a half miles a day.
They took off. Number one got 15 miles out, but the last one only got 5 miles out.
No.
Because the line stopped.
No, the first stop when they got there, the rest kept going until they caught up at the campsites.
Yeah, you just did, kind of.
Exactly. What you have to remember. Yeah.
Oh, the Egyptians are behind us. How can they get back to the front?
Exactly. Pass the message along. Yeah, you know those telephone communication games. Hey, say this, and the message gets passed on down and gets corrupted. Yeah, right. No, but what they did was, as they walked out in a 10 to 15 mile stretch, so the first guys head out first, and the others had to wait. It's kind of like the light turns green. Why don't we all immediately just go? You got to wait for the people in front of you to move first. So they move out, then the others move behind them. So they arrive and stop, and then the others catch up. So the place they camp has to be wide enough for 2.5 million people to camp. And so it took 15 and so the head of the line goes 15.5 miles. And then the back of the line, after they stop, the back of the line catches up doing their 15.5 miles to all arrive at the same place.
They didn't wait dinner.
I know dinner probably got cold. I'm sure they all fended for themselves and their tribes and whatnot. So let's talk about this sea crossing. So basically how we got here, they made a sharp turn at Etham toward Pi-hahiroth, the opening of the caves, facing north toward Baal-zephon. The opening was between the mountainous tower of Migdol on the west, the sea on the east, and the seaside encampment is straight away through Hahiroth entrance leading to the sea. So the encampment faces Hahiroth, specifically Migdol and the mountains, and it all fits. So now we've arrived. Let's get ready to cross this sea and see what we're looking at here for the sea crossing. So here they are coming down. This is what we're talking about here, crossing this. So let's read Exodus 14, picking up in 21. Then Moses reached out with his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back, accompanied by a strong east wind all night, turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. We'll touch more on this as we go next week, but the wind didn't cause the sea to be moved. The movement of the sea was accompanied by the wind. If the wind were that strong to blow the sea, it'd be blowing the people around too. So that makes no sense. Plus, the wind would have to be coming from multiple directions to move this much seawater out of the way. So the wind was part of it, and the wind makes sense. You're moving this much water, there's going to be a vacuum that the rushing air is going to fill. So that all makes sense. But yeah. And so the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right, on their left. Very important. I want to add First Corinthians chapter 10 here. And this will actually connect with the morning message. First Corinthians chapter 10. Yes, that's New Testament. Paul writes to the church, 1 Corinthians 10, 1 and 2. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and they all passed through the sea, and they all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Down there. So Paul is equating the congregation of Israel with our church congregation and understanding this connection here in the Lord's consistency. So I thought that was worth mentioning here. And so let's take a look at this to wind down our class for this morning here. So looking at a distance of about 9.6 miles to the other side. The Burj Khalifa, we talked about this in our Wednesday night series. Tallest building in the world. It's in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. Its peak stands at 1,823 feet high, up to the top floor there, 163 floors. The depth of the Gulf of Aqaba here at this crossing point, Nuweiba crossing here, 2,543 feet. So they're going deeper than the tallest building in the world. This is why that guy I mentioned earlier, Egyptologist David Roll, who I appreciate so much, he doesn't believe any of this. He's great with the history, but not with the miracles. He says it couldn't have been there because that would take a miracle, to which I say, duh. That's the whole point. There's some things where God uses natural timing and beautiful constellation miracles of bringing all these different pieces together that can't be coincidence. But there are times too when God just overrides the laws of nature because he's got authority to do so, and there can be nothing but God. Clearly, in the Exodus sea crossing, there is no room for a natural explanation for what the scripture tells us. This had to be nothing but the hand of God. This was so big, it changed world history. Changed history for the nation of Israel, changed history for the world nations around them. Everyone knew about this event. It freaked them out, and that was the point. And we see that, as I mentioned, with Rahab. She says, our hearts melted because of you guys. Not only did you beat these armies coming on your way up here, but what the Lord did for you there. This is worldwide known here. And this is the only devastating fall of Egypt in ancient history. And it's right at this point in time. Makes sense. So it all fits here. So yeah, this was a very big deal. So they crossed the Gulf of Aqaba. Well, there are different spots where they may have crossed, right? Well, here's the slope for where we're looking at as the crossing site. And if you go look at other places where they may have crossed, look at those slopes. Okay, not too bad, but that's a bit much. Same thing here, that's really a bit much. And forget that, and you're gonna get car sick or whatever going up that. So looking at the depth profile here, here we go sloping down 10.5% or 6 degrees coming down, and going back up, it's 13% or 7.4 degrees. get this, 6-degree slope here, that's the legal limit for downward slopes for interstate highways.
Some of them are 8, actually.
So right around there. Yeah,
Well, you said interstate.
interstate, yeah, interstate. Now, the non-interstate roads, yeah, they go. But that's the requirement. So that is a slope that's manageable, is the point. This 13%, 7.4 degrees. I believe it's about 8 degrees. That's wheelchair ramps. They have to be about that. So, and this is nature. It's as if it were designed to be that way. Brother Peter.
Sand too,
Yep.
it could be wet sand, you know, maybe makes it a little harder, you know, but if it was rock going across, it didn't. A little harder.
Actually, what we're told, and this actually might work hand in hand with what you're saying, we read that they walked on dry land, but what happened was, since the waters were so miraculously moved away, the ground underneath them was hard enough for them to walk across. So even if it was sand, it was dry sand that was compacted enough for them to walk across. And it shows it goes at least about 5 miles across. So they could easily walk in ranks of 4 miles across. And that's about what it would take for them to cross this overnight, as we see that they did. So that's pretty cool. Let's see. So we ready to cross? If only they had the technology back then. Give it time. Give it time. Yes. If it's not on social media, it didn't happen, right?
They haven't put the pictures of the people in the back. It really is,
Right on. So that's what it would have looked like. That's how much of it. And this makes sense with the Egyptians not even realizing they were going into the seabed because the water was so far apart. So if the waters were separated 5 miles apart, you didn't see them. Yeah, so they didn't see the water on their sides. Yeah, that adds a dimension. Also, keep in mind, this was overnight and the Egyptians went at daybreak. So there's that too. So here, so again, 9.6 miles across, a width of 5 miles here, the natural land there. There's a little zoom in of it. So that is the Exodus Sea crossing, ladies and gentlemen. And just to zoom out a bit, get a bigger picture. That's how messy. Here's the whole Gulf of Aqaba coming off of the Red Sea down below. That's how big a swath of land was made available and accessible, and how much volume of water was moved to either side, a wall on each side, for this to happen. This is nothing but a super incredible, miraculous act of God that changed the whole world as we know it today. So that's a good pausing point for me. Any reactions, observations, thoughts, or questions on what the Bible says and these things we have looked at and considered for this morning? All good? Yeah.
First going over this, I've always been fascinated by I know it was large and deep.
Sure.
But I've always been fascinated by that they made a specific point to say we crossed over dry land.
Beautiful. Yes.
And if you think about that, because we know it's already difficult to walk in,
Sure.
but then try to ride a bicycle.
Right.
Big difference.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Right.
So the difficulty, even though they might have been faster, well, not here.
Right. Right.
And then God, of course, is holding.
There you go.
He's holding the water.
So true.
And all that. They just they needed visuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As we do.
Yeah.
We couldn't just separate it and hold it back and they go on.
Yeah.
They have to see it.
Oh, yeah.
So mankind hasn't changed maybe,
Nothing new under the sun as far as human nature goes. Yeah.
but I don't know, that's in this part, it fascinates me that it's very specific.
Yeah. So two quick responses to that, and we'll wrap up here. God was so thorough and complete in his miracle when he talks about them going on dry land. God moved the water so completely, there weren't puddles left. After the rain, it dries up, it still have puddles or here. So there wasn't any of that. There weren't molecules of water left. It was all gone. It was dry. And the other thing, as far as the Hebrews crossing versus the Egyptians crossing, the Hebrews crossed with no problem, as we saw. The Egyptians trying to cross, they had some problems, problems with the chariot wheels and all that stuff. Well, here's the thing. The ground did not change. The ground wasn't any different for the Egyptian army than it was for the Hebrews. What changed? We read here in continuing on in Exodus 14 that it was God working against the Egyptians, and the Egyptians recognized it. The same God who had worked against them in the 10 plagues is now working against the army. And they said, let's abandon, let's retreat because their God is working against us. Of course, it was too late. And so they weren't stuck in the mud. There was no mud for them to get stuck in. This was a case of God not only miraculously acting with the parting of the sea, but even miraculously tripping up their chariot wheels. Oh, and last tidbit here for fun here, just to show the timing of this. Chariots were pretty new to Egypt at this time. They weren't horseback riding yet, but the chariots were used in warfare. And we know that Pharaoh Dudimos' firstborn son was killed in the plague. Harmset, I think his name was. He was in his late 20s. Well, get this. Bum, 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 bum. If you can see it here, there's a woman here and a man here. She's got something under her. He's got something under him. This is Prince Kamumsuwaset, who is the son of Dudimos II, not the firstborn son who died in the plague. And what's he got associated with him? Chariot gloves. He was the commander of the chariot force going after Moses and the Hebrews. And so this is a sign of his royalty, of his position as the son of Pharaoh, leader, because oftentimes as they would raise the sons to be next in line, they'd have positions in the military. You send them off to military school to get them. And so same thing happened to Moses. We saw that. And so here we have just further confirmation right at this time frame, Pharaoh of the Exodus, his son had the chariot gloves and was leading the chariots out along with his dad in chasing of the Hebrews. So it's just further confirmation outside the Bible of what we knew all along was right and true with the Bible. So fun stuff there. Okay, enough yakking there. We'll call it quits for the morning and stop our screen share, stop recording, and we'll get ready to go before the Lord in song.